geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, jets and sharks, comic book fans from the world over. Welcome to yet another exciting, thrill packed, information loaded episode of Ask Chuck Dixon. This is where you get to ask me, Chuck Dixon, about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Eyes on the road, everybody. And let's get right to it. Gentle Savage asks, when it comes to how you write original characters in your stories, are their personalities something you come up with on your own, or do you take inspiration from other characters for their personalities? Well, as a writer, you try not to take personalities from other characters. You try to make each character you create as unique as you can, give them unique properties, personalities, background, appearances, motivation, which is the most important thing about any character you create, is what does that character want? What drives them? And then equally as important in my mind is their voice. What do they sound like when they talk? Because, we all bring our personality out. We reveal a lot about ourselves in our choice of words, phrasing, accents, which try to stay away from in comics, dialects, things like that. We sort of give stuff away about ourselves. And we've all been in a situation where, someone will say, hey, are you from? Because just from the way you talk, just from things you say. So voice is very important to make that unique so that all of your characters don't sound like you wrote them. You try to make your characters sound as much as possible like they're saying things that they actually thought of. And actors will tell you that. That's important in acting. Let's put across the idea that you're not repeating scripted dialogue. You're repeating your own thoughts. You're expressing your own thoughts, even though they aren't your own thoughts. They were written for you. But actors have to create the appearance of spontaneity. And that's why the voice of a character is so important. I was creating Airboy, or recreating Airboy. I didn't create Airboy, but I did create, the Golden Age Airboy's son for all intents and purposes. And I thought, well, I'm writing this teenage kid, and I knew last thing I want is for this kid to sound like, try to be hip. I'm like a 30-year-old guy. I don't want to make this kid, I don't want to have this forced hipness or try to be with it or now. So I just had him speak like a kid, he didn't use any current phrasing or anything like that, then current phrasing. And so he just he talks a lot in hyperbole, and he talks more casually than an adult would. And he asks questions an adult wouldn't ask. And trying to build a character that's interesting. And here's a kid who has all of his dad's properties because and strengths and weaknesses, but it stands as his own person. And he is the result of his father's success, because in the Airboy series, we had his dad, David Nelson, go from being a high flying World War II adventure character to being a successful aviation engineer, aviation industrialist, much like Howard Hughes. So, all of that sort of lent that to it. And as an example, continuing from Airboy, I had to reintroduce the character Skywolf, and Skywolf was going to be an older guy. He was going to be a World War II vet, kind of grizzled. I made up the fact that he was from Texas. And then I largely based his voice and personality and the way he reacted to things on my own father. Because my dad would just say crazy stuff. Well, not crazy stuff, but memorable stuff all the time. He was always good for a quote, and so I just sort of thought, well, instead of thinking what would Skywolf say in this instance, what would my dad say in this situation? And he had the background. He was a B-17 crew member, World War II vet, so he could have been Skywolf easily. So so there's an instance where I borrowed from real life. But generally, you're borrowing from people you know, whether you're writing a new character or an established character. I mean, you don't want to change the character. You don't necessarily want to put your mark on the character. But even if you're writing an established character, you as a writer, as a creator, have to find your way into that character, to make them believable in your mind, to bring them to life in your mind. And so, in a way, you are kind of putting your mark on that character. Um, in the instance of Catwoman, um, my take on Catwoman was somewhat different than other writers in that I saw Catwoman as the only well adjusted character in the DCU. She's actually happy. She actually likes what she does. And a lot of this was encouraged by the way Jim Ballant portrayed her in that current iteration of Catwoman. It's kind of inspired by Jim. Jim's a happy guy. He's one of the happiest people you ever want to meet. Well adjusted, just a pleasure to be around. And I thought, well, let's put a little bit of that into Catwoman. So there's a little bit of Jim Ballant in my version of Catwoman. And each time I wrote her, I kind of, even if Jim wasn't drawing her, I kept her that way. She likes what she does. She's a thief. She's satisfied with her life as it is. Building a new character like the Horseman, like Joe Bennett and I created at Rippaverse. Um, it's in the vigilante masked character, the lone crime fighter, the one guy against all. And, I've written that character a lot. Batman, Punisher, Levon Cade, others. And it's like, well, I don't want to write the same character again. I want to put my own spin on this genre. So, Hector um, Cabalero is a little bit, was quite a bit different from Frank Castle, that he has someone to go home to, someone he cares about. He's not as grim. He's not as driven by. He is somewhat driven by trauma as an adult, but he's not as broken as Frank Castle was, and and also he does share one thing with Frank that um, if he busts up a gang and finds a bunch of money lying around, he got to pick up that money to fund his war on crime. But with Frank Castle, that money is just an investment in his continuing war. Um, Hector's a little bit more pragmatic. He wants that money to pay the bills. So, because he has people he's supporting, he has a family he's helping to support. And so, part of it is, you know, altruistic crime fighting. Uh, Another part of it is this is what he's good at, so he's just going to do what he's good at. That's what a man does. And then the other part is profit motive, quite naked avarice. He's not doing it to get rich. He's just doing it to you know be able to walk into his house justified. And even Batman, even a classic, iconic character like Batman, when you come on the character as a, you're assigned it as a new creator. Again, you don't want to change Batman. You don't want to make Batman your own. I never wanted to see Chuck Dixon's Batman on a cover. I'm an invisible hand writer, but still, you got to find your way in. And the big thing with um, Bruce Wayne Batman was exploring, what would his sense of humor be? I mean, he has to have one. Be a little grim, ironic. He's never going to be silly. Things like that. It's just aspects like that because, there's just so much. I mean, there's so much I could bring to Batman. You can't make any change. To me, you can't make any changes. You're handed this character, got to work within the framework. There's a little wiggle room here and there. Sense of humor is one of them. Another one is, his earnestness as far as attractions of the opposite sex. You can play with that. I mean, how where does Playboy Bruce Wayne, where does the pastiche, the mask end, and the real man begin? Where it's like he's walking around with this model on his arm, fashion model on his arm. How does he really feel about her? I mean, maybe he's getting serious. And a number of times in the time that I was involved in the Batman character, we did introduce characters, female interests that he became quite serious about. So there's that to think about. Um, the Punisher, again, I sort of, I leaned into the humor of the character. He doesn't have a sense of humor. Frank Castle has no sense of humor. He doesn't think anything's funny, but he's unintentionally funny. And there, I kind of borrowed his voice and personality from lots of people that I've known in my life who, um, were not as grim as Frank Castle, but maybe had a more sardonic view of life, a more cynical view of life, and they sort of imbued Frank Castle and gave him a voice, gave him an attitude. Then all of these things help layer things onto the character to make them engaging and interesting and relatable. Now, Nightwing's probably one of the most complicated characters that I wrote because I'd say he's a well-meaning moron, but I don't think he's well-meaning. he was he wanted the fame and glory of being a mass crime fighter. He just thought he had this romantic notion that he would go out and beat up criminals with a baseball bat, and he would become this beloved figure, like a legendary urban legend kind of figure like Batman and the actual Nightwing. But the guy wasn't smart enough to even come up with his own name for himself. He borrows it and then sort of bastardizes even the spelling. You have to wonder, did Tad even know how Nightwing's name was spelled? He sort of came up with his own thing and his own costume, and I thought it was just perfect. The hockey jersey, and he's an object of pity as well as scorn because, as it turns out, he's not a terribly heroic hero. He's very much an anti-hero, and I would say even a villain, because while his motivations are never pure, he wanted all of the goodies, all from being a vigilante, all the glamour that he supposed came along with the job, but none of the consequences, and consequently, he gets himself in a lot of trouble because he goes a bit overboard and he doesn't have a lot of common sense or any idea of uh, proportionate punishment for the criminals that he finds. He's he's not a nice guy, but he was fascinating to create him and come up with his background and why he was this way. What made Tad Ryerstad into the loser that he was. Joshua Ignatowski, welcome home. What are your thoughts on how it seemed the enforcers kept becoming less of a legitimate threat as they fought with Spider-Man more and more over the course of his career? And do you wish that they were still portrayed as more seriously threatening members of his rogues gallery? The enforcers, Montana and Fancy Dan and Ox and these two other guys I don't recognize. But when I was a kid and they first, dropped in on Spider-Man, I remember buying this comic at the drugstore. I wasn't terribly impressed with the enforcers. I thought, Spider-Man's going to make quick work of them. And in the story, Spider-Man thinks that as well and kind of underestimates them and, takes a beating. But the most important part of this story for me was, and I'm sure for Steve Ditko and Stan Lee, was exploring the big man. The big man, or the big man, was the mysterious masked um, crime lord who had taken over New York City and decided to bring down Spider-Man. He was sort of a prototype for what would be the Kingpin to show up later. And but I liked when I was reading it as a kid that the big man, his story had a beginning, middle, and end, and eventually he is defeated. And I love the whole overarching storyline. I wasn't that crazy about the enforcers. I mean, I thought they were okay. I kind of saw Stan Lee's hand a little bit more in their creation. I mean, come on, Fancy Dan. So, um, so, but they were part of a larger story, and so I did enjoy their appearance. I don't really know much about any of their subsequent appearances after that. I mean, heck, I might have written them somewhere. Um, Now I'm regretting I never had them meet the Punisher. You could just kill them all. Oh man, yeah, a guy throwing a lariat. What would Frank Castle make of that? So Twin Spin, Creature from the Black Lagoon, is back to wish you a happy Twin Spin. Joshua Ignatowski, trains or cars? I guess you're asking me which I prefer. I'm a train man. I mean, I drive a car. Everybody drives a car. Uh, I like my car. I don't love my car. I'm not a big car guy. I just want a reliable means of transportation to get me here and there. My only requirements is that it have a V8 engine because I'm a V8 man, I want to know there's something under the hood that's going to get me in and out of trouble. Uh, like I get in a lot of trouble. But I dig trains, man. I'll go anywhere by train, and I don't care how long I'm on the train. I've been, I started taking the train after 9/11 when my brother-in-law, who worked for the FAA, said, "Don't fly," and I had just accepted a job at CrossGen, so I was back and forth by train, and I found out I love this. This is awesome. You get like what they call a roomette. Got a little room to yourself. You can read and watch the country go by, and the attendants on board, they're always awesome. All the crew members on Amtrak are terrific, and it's just a great time. And I remember once they told us, well, there's going to be a little bit delay. We were 18 hours late getting into Philadelphia one time. And I'm like, I don't care. You give me 2 days late. I'm on the train, baby. I'm loving this. I'm loving this. I would love to take a trip that was like 3-4 days on the train. That would be awesome. I was in a derailment once, and I still love the train because you got the dining car, and trust me, the food is good, not the chili. Never order the chili on Amtrak. That's a big mistake. But the dining car, and I used to love the coffee, but now they do Starbucks, that undrinkable acidic swill, instead of the awesome coffee they used to serve on a train. I mean, you got to imagine the coffee on a train would be incredible. Uh, but the dining car, the food is good. Excellent stuff, big selection, and you get to sit there. And a lot of times, if you travel alone and the train is crowded, they'll seat you with strangers, and that's a great experience. I mean, that's something we don't do anymore. Sit down in a restaurant at a table with people we've never met before. And I've had some terrific conversations, met some absolutely amazing people sitting in the dining car. Um, and also, I mean, people ask me, what's your favorite fictional vehicle? It's always going to be the General from the Wild Wild West. Jim West and Artemis Gordon had their own private rail car. And if I was like a multi-millionaire and just had money to burn, I would have my own private rail car. I would. And it would be modeled after Jim West's car, right down to the hidden gun cabinet. Don't tell anybody, because if I hit the lotto, I might be buying that car. So this is our little secret, that my rail car is going to have a rack of Winchesters and Henry rifles in it. But yeah, the train all the way, all on board. Triple spin, of course, triple spin for Joshua Ignatowski. When did you first get into Lucky Luke? Now, I was recently corrected by my good friend Jean-Francois Cavalier that it's pronounced Lukey Luke. And I just laugh at him whenever he corrects me. Lukey Luke. Lucky Luke, obviously, huge success in Europe, and still going on. I mean, I think there's like 80 volumes, 80 comic albums of Lucky Luke. Thank goodness they're all being translated into English. I think I've read about 75 of these. They've even updated the series, a marvelous updating of the Lucky Luke series, making it still a comedy western, but moving it more toward reality rather than the wild pastiche parody that the Lucky Luke series is. But it deserves all of its praise, and it deserves the enormous audience because the stories are funny and heartfelt and surprising, and I love the rotating cast and the running gags and all the rest of it. And there's an excellent live action movie. Jean Dujardin plays Lucky Luke, and it's a lot of fun. The movie is a lot of fun if you ever get to see it. It has one really hysterical sequence in it. that I will watch the whole movie just to see that scene. Um, so anyway, yeah. And when did I get into it? Because that was your question. I got into it in the '70s when the old Comic Buyer's Guide would have ads from British comic distributors, and you would be able to send off to them to get stuff imported. And Lucky Luke was one of the things that I would order because it was always in publication in English in England. Um, before it's still in publication from England because the editions we get here in the United States are actually from England, but they're direct imports. But I used to have to buy them through an independent retailer. And I forget who the publisher was in England, but the translations were terrible because they would make them, they would have the character saying groovy and right on. I think the English thought that Americans talked like that in the 1870s, but that's when I got into it. But thank goodness I can read them all now. Hey, have you subscribed? Lucky Luke or Lukey Luke wants you to subscribe. And if you've already subscribed, check to make sure you're subscribed because a lot of dirty work at the crossroads where they'll cancel your subscription without your permission. I've experienced that myself as a YouTube consumer. Quadruple spin. What are you doing to me, Joshua? Another question from Joshua Ignatowski. Nice work on Iron Man number 36 from 1998. It would have been awesome if Marvel had kept you on board for more issues. If you had been kept on the book, would you have immediately followed up on the storyline of what happened in the aftermath of Iron Man's mission from S.H.I.E.L.D., or left that plot thread dangling for just a little bit while writing stories that focused on other things for a little while? Also, what kind of words do you think he had with S.H.I.E.L.D. afterwards in his Tony Stark identity about how they kept him in the dark on key information about the mission? Yeah, it's my one and only issue of Iron Man. The editor at the time was in a bind. Um, I've told this story before. I really think it's worth telling again. Um, they, she called me and said, I need an Iron Man story like right away. I need an Iron Man story the next 3 days. And I'm like, okay, I like Iron Man. Yeah, let me see what I come up with. So I sweated a bit because Iron Man is just dumped on me cold. I wasn't thinking about Iron Man. I didn't have any prepared Iron Man ideas. And then I was watching the news and the submarine, the Kursk, uh, very dramatic story, very tragic story. The Russian submarine, Soviet submarine at the time. Well, no, it wasn't a Soviet submarine, was it? The Kursk had sunk to the bottom of the North Sea, and the men inside could not be rescued. And I thought, well, there's my story. Iron Man gets tapped by S.H.I.E.L.D. to go down and try to rescue the crew members of a trapped Russian submarine. And there was my story. And I handed it in. And when I handed it in, within 3 days, I asked the editor, I said, well, what's wrong? Is the writer sick? Is there something else going on? Blah. And she said, well, the new Iron Man writer doesn't have any ideas yet. So you're probably already asking yourself questions based on what I just told you. But anyway, the upshot is it turned into a real boon for me because this is an entirely standalone Iron Man story. It always gets thrown into collections like to fill out the page count. So I don't know how many times the story's been reprinted, over and over and over again. And so, I see a little coin. So thank you, Iron Man. Where I would have taken it if I became regular Iron Man writer, I would have gone back to my favorite run on Iron Man, which was the Archie Goodwin Tales of Suspense run leading into his own solo title, where he was very much involved with S.H.I.E.L.D. in much the same way that Howard Hughes was involved with the CIA, which I'm sure was Archie's inspiration. And I would very much, explore that, Tony's dealings with them, and as you point out, probably friction because they weren't always being entirely truthful with Tony Stark, as intelligence agencies are wont to do. They only tell you what you need to know or what they want you to know rather than what you need to know. So yeah, I probably would have gone in that direction. So there you go. Thomas Pellegrino, question 1. What is your favorite Punisher story you've written And if you could change anything about it, what would it be? I'm not a guy that looks back a lot, and I've said this over and over again. People are sick of hearing about it. The arc that I did with Gary Kwampus, I know everybody thinks immediately of Punisher Warzone and JRJR. Yeah, I loved writing that. Very, very proud of that. And it's definitely a career highlight. But just for sheer guilty pleasure, if I believed in guilty pleasures, this 3 issue arc on Punisher War Journal, where the Punisher is up against um, an urban drug gang and a sort of visiting gang of, for want of a better word, hillbillies who show up, and they're making I believe crystal meth, or maybe they were cooking crack, whatever it was. They moved from moonshining to selling hard narcotics on the street and distributing it. And Punisher inserts himself in this war between this you know redneck gang, down from the hollers, fighting against this Latino gang out of Colombia. And he inserts himself, and he does the exoskeleton thing, which I discussed in a recent video, which I thought was really funny. And of course, you know, Gary's knocking it out of the park. I mean, just the way he drew these characters and everything else is just a lot of fun. That Punisher War Journal run with Gary was, they shouldn't even have paid me. I was having so much fun working on it. Twin Spin. Here we go. Thomas Pellegrino is back with Why Didn't Rush City Get a Sequel? I really enjoy the fast pace of the car chases and the inclusion of Black Canary. Do you own this property, or does DC? I don't own it. DC doesn't own it. Pontiac owns it because, for whatever reason, somebody on the board at Pontiac contacted DC Comics and said, let's do a comic book miniseries to promote our new car. And I can't even remember the name of the car, to tell you the truth. My personal theory is that somebody on the board at Pontiac was a comic book fan and just wanted to get into the world of comic books for whatever reason. And so we created, and I guess they turned to me because no one else wanted to write it, and they turned to me because they thought, yeah, you've done this kind of stuff before with Car Warriors and Speed Racer, and Racer X, and the Punisher, blah 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 blah, and they probably thought I was suited for it, and I was suited for it, and I enjoyed writing it, and writing car chases in a comic is kind of challenging and fun because it's a car chase in a comic book. Conventional wisdom will tell us that that's dead on the page, but I worked really hard to make sure it wasn't, and apparently you responded well. You liked it. You liked the car chases. So there you go. Yeah, I guess it belongs to Pontiac. I doubt DC could ever even reprint this, let alone do a sequel, because they don't own any of the rights, other than obviously the rights to Black Canary, and I believe, if I remember right, Gearhead, the villain that Graham Nolan and I created for Batman. I think he shows up in this. David Jordan, was it you that came up with the retcon that Dick had a bad experience as Robin with Two-Face, so he has a special dislike for him? I know you featured this in your Nightwing run, and before it was in Chronicle arc in Batman, I believe. But were you the originator of it, or was it a plot point beforehand? I pretty much was the originator of it. I was so immersed in the Batman offices and Batman universe. I had worked on so many of the titles. I mean, I was balancing basically 4 Batman related titles a month, that I really started thinking about the whole thing as like a saga. That these weren't, to me, individual stories and individual encounters between the characters, but they were an ongoing thing. So you didn't just, take down villain A or villain B or villain C, that there would actually be consequences. There would be something more there. Some of these villains start to take these things personally. And so I started to build in retcon this idea that Dick Grayson's first major foray as a crime fighter was against Two-Face, Two-Face had a fixation for Robin because what is Robin? He is one half of the dynamic duo. What is Two-Face's obsession? The number two. And so he becomes obsessed with Robin and continues to be obsessed with Robin no matter who Robin is. If it's Jason Todd, if it's Tim Drake, it doesn't matter. Two-Face has a special loathing for the Boy Wonder, and so I sort of built it in everywhere. I mean, I used it in Robin. I used it in every title, and every time I had Two-Face show up, it would be that same little reminder that they had, and obviously in Robin Year One, I got to explore it quite a bit. Um, the traumatic events that occurred when these two characters met for the first time. So I was trying to you know deepen the mythology of these characters, if, for lack of a better phrase. And I had a lot of things like that going on, like these little subplots or little things, and some of them I sadly never got to bring to fruition. If you're a real diehard '90s Batman fan, you might remember the Mystery Nun, who occasionally would show up and help Tim Drake, and I never really got to the end of that. Another one being Captain Fear. We never got to revisit Captain Fear, so I never got to reveal that Captain Fear's true identity was J. Devlin Davenport, um, Bruce Wayne's annoying neighbor. It's things like that. I mean, I was on these titles long enough and given enough carte blanche that it really was building, weaving quite a complex tapestry of inter-character relationships, and having the time of my life doing it. It was a lot of fun. Dara O'Sullivan. I grew up in rural Ireland, and my nearest comic book shop was over 200 miles away. That is rural. But they were able to ship my comics to me in the mail. I'll never forget the first time I was able to visit the store. I was 18, but I felt like a child in a candy store. I couldn't get over the rows and rows of the monthly superhero titles, the trade paperbacks, as well as the cabinets of toys, models, and statues. Do you have a favorite comic book store from either growing up or currently? And what is so special about it? There weren't any comic book stores when I was a kid. My first exposure to a vast amount of comics was my first comic book convention that I went to in New York. Um, the Phil Seuling Con. I think it was like the second or third comic book convention ever, and my mind was blown. Just stacks and stacks of comics and hundreds, and trust me, only hundreds of other guys. There was only one woman at the whole convention, uh, and all into comics. And I never really met another comic book fan. Kids growing up, we all read comics, but I never met anybody who was into them the way I was. And so I got to spend time talking to other aficionados, and finding out what they liked, and being exposed to all these different comics I'd never seen before, from the past, and seeing artists in the flesh, comic book writers. Whoa, he's right there. I can reach out and touch Gray Morrow. Woo, not that I would. Uh, so my comic book store was the drugstore or the farmer's market, where they would sell stacks of comics, bound and twined for 50 cents. You get literally a stack of comics that would keep you reading all week. And but my favorite comic book store that wasn't really a comic book store was we would spend part of the summer in Stone Harbor, New Jersey. It's this little town on the Jersey Shore. It's just north of Wildwood, just south of Avalon, and we would spend a week or 2 weeks every summer in Stone Harbor. And in Stone Harbor was a place called Hankins, and Hankins was a news agency, and they sold all of the newspapers from Philadelphia and New York and everything else to people vacationing there. And what they also had was a rack of comics, and it was every comic. They got every comic that was published because it was a news agency, and they got them in depth, so I didn't get the missed copies. And back then, you didn't know what was coming out. You didn't know until you went to the comic book rack or the spin rack what was going to be there. And it would be a new comic book, sometimes be a new publisher, and you never knew. And it was always a treat to go to Hankins. And we stayed in an apartment above the news agency, which was like the coolest thing in the world. I'm living above, this massive collection of comics downstairs. And I was a frequent visitor. They saw me coming. And just to give you an example, I walk in and they had this big Strange Tales annual #1. It's like, oh my gosh, all my dreams come true. It's like all of these great, Jack Kirby big monster stories and Steve Ditko haunted house stories all in one big collection for a quarter. I was absolutely in heaven. Another visit, and this one floored me, Marvel Tales #1. It was all these origin stories that I had missed because I kind of got into Marvel a couple of months late because Marvel comics were so poorly distributed that, if you were a Marvel fan, you had to hunt everywhere to find issues, mostly because they were being distributed by national periodical publications, which was DC Comics, who had no interest in helping Marvel get blanket distribution. Now, I saw this 72 big pages of the origins of all of these characters that I was already familiar with, but I had no idea how they got started. So I got to find out Spider-Man, Hulk, Sergeant Fury, Iron Man, Thor, and Giant Man, Ant-Man, how those stories began, and it's cover to cover, wall to wall, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. What's not to love? And another one, this one stunned me when I was a kid. His Name is Savage. It was this magazine. It seemed kind of all grown up. It's written by Archie Goodwin, who I was familiar with from Creepy comics, and Gil Kane, who I was familiar with from Green Lantern. And if you've never seen this comic, I think Fantagraphics still keeps it in print. It's basically a graphic novel about this tough guy, just this badass character. And I was blown away by it when I was a kid because it was so violent for a comic book. Easily the most violent comic book I'd ever read up to that point. Of course, I loved every panel of it. So, that was my favorite comic store, Hankins, the news agency in Stone Harbor. Sadly, no longer exists. The news agency, Stone Harbor, is still there, very much the same as it was when I was a kid. Another question from Thomas Pellegrino, and I should have given you a spin here. Sorry, I owe you one. Okay. Out of the graphic novels that you wrote, which do you think deserved a follow-up miniseries or at least another graphic novel? Also, which of these graphic novels do you wish you can rework and craft again? Well, a Punisher, a man named Frank, was a Punisher set in a Western. It was kind of an Elseworlds deal, and art by John Buscema. And I did write a sequel, and about, I think, 20 pages of it were completed by Russ Heath. And it was going to be Frank gets commissioned to kill Pancho Villa. And he goes down into Mexico and he runs into complications with the expeditionary force of American soldiers who basically invaded Mexico to bring Pancho Villa to justice, led by General Blackjack Pershing, and aided and abetted by a young Lieutenant George Patton. Yes, that George Patton. And Frank Castle and George Patton kind of run into each other and don't like each other because they're kind of kindred spirits. Patton had a very romantic view, and this is in real life, had a very romantic view of the American West. And when he got down to Mexico, kind of tried to live out his fantasies as a gunfighter. And this is no BS. He was challenging Mexican bandits to, gunfights in the street, just like in a movie. And he always won. He got in a lot of trouble with Pershing because these were all side trips he was taking on his own to basically go get in fights. His Patton, that's the kind of dude he was. And so the sequel is, going to be all about that. and sadly, um, it never got completed. Uh, they kind of Don Daly was fired at Marvel, and they just sort of threw all of his projects to the wind. So we never got to see it. I own most of the original pages though from this. I picked them up over the years of the pages that Russ Heath drew. And wow, what a dream project! Absolute dream project. John Buscema did an awesome job too, and I would have loved to have written a third one with John Severin on art. So there you go. Catwoman Vampirella, yeah, it was a one-off thing. I can't ever see doing a sequel with it. The only thing I remember is getting a hard time from the people at Harris who owned the rights to Vampirella. Uh, there was a bit of like bad form moments. They did some stuff you just don't do. There's protocols in comics when you do these crossovers. There's a little bit of a give and take, and they were kind of difficult to deal with. And my editor kind of threw me to the wolves. It wasn't the regular Catwoman editor. It kind of just threw me at their mercy, which I didn't appreciate. But it was fun to write. I like both characters very much. I had a lot of experience with Catwoman and Vampirella. Vampirella is whatever you want Vampirella to be. So it was fun. I enjoyed it, but I don't think I'd ever want to revisit it. Batman Blackgate, this is another one where I wanted to do Batman in a prison story. And it's a bit of a mystery if you've ever read it. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a bit more layered. It's not strictly an action story. And I wrote it in the idea that it's very much a classic, prison story from the period of film noir. And if I had my druthers, it would have been printed in black and white. And I had enough juice at DC that I insisted that Joe Staton draw it. And I got some pushback from the Batman guys. It's like, Joe, he's stuff's kind of cartoony and everything else. And I'm like, no, Joe will knock this out of the park because I know Joe loves old movies and he loves old film noir movies and everything else. So he'll know exactly what to do here. And everybody was very pleased. Now they put, I think it's Ian Hodgkins. He was a British inker. They put him on, and he does these very elaborate, very illustrative inking style. But it was beautiful because he didn't bury Joe under all of this extra detail. He still does very much. You have Joe Staton's energy and everything else, and his impeccable storytelling. You don't get lost, but it did add a sort of noirish frisson to it, and even a touch of like Universal horror movie, kind of double lighting and things like that. And I was very, very pleased with this project and the way it came out. And I think the Bat guys were too. They had to admit that my instincts were right. That, and I just love working with Joe. I just love his stuff. Joker's Devil's Advocate is very much a done in one story. I wouldn't want to do a sequel to it. I wish it was more well known. I wish DC would keep this one in constant publication because everybody that reads it seems to enjoy it. It's if you haven't read it, the Joker gets accused and sentenced, convicted and sentenced to death for a murder that Batman suspects he did not commit. He thinks Joker's done a lot of bad stuff, but he didn't do this. And in the name of justice, I'm going to, clear his name. I'm going to prove the Joker didn't do this, so they can let him out of prison again. And his reasoning, and everybody's like, why are you doing that? Just let him go to the chair and die. It's the Joker. But Batman's like, no, it's not right, because if he dies, the person who's actually guilty goes free. And I cannot have that. I cannot have that. So it kind of defines the kind of guy Batman is. It's this moral quandary. Plus, we get these really terrific Joker sequences, some of which are very, very funny in a dark way. And Graham and I worked really hard on this because we really wanted it to be like a milestone kind of project in both of our careers. And Graham very much pitched in here as a writer. We plotted this thing together. If you've ever read it or if you've never read it, it's quite a whodunit mystery. I mean, we try to keep you guessing up to the very end who actually committed these murders. Make it very clear it wasn't the Joker, but it was someone else. And we introduce a whole cast of characters that of possibilities that it could be, very Agatha Christie. And I was most pleased because our editor, Archie Goodwin, was our editor on this, told me that he read the script and he thought, oh, I can see the end coming. And then at the end said, you know what? I didn't see the end coming. You really surprised me with the resolution to this mystery. So Graham and I, you know, our work was done. Trust me, we sweated this one. I mean, I like to think I work hard and I sweated on everything, but we really wanted to make this one special and really sing, and I think it does. I just wish it was in print more often, or at all. Last one, Justice Riders. Yeah, I wanted to do sequels. Eddie Berganza was my editor, and I kept pitching. I pitched a sequel in which it was a Batman centric sequel. This was, if you don't know, this was the Justice League set in the Old West, very much an Elseworld story. And I had a sequel in mind where Bane leads a Mexican bandit gang, and the story opens with he guns down Batman, he kills Batman, and Robin has to go down into Mexico to basically get revenge. And I was going to do very much a man with no name, fistful of dollars kind of thing, with Robin getting way over his head, trying to hunt down Bane. But it never got anywhere because I don't think Eddie was interested in doing another one, even though this one performed very well, or maybe just not interested in doing one with me. And so many comic book editors can't look you in the eye and say no, so they just come up with reasons to delay the project. And it's kind of sad because I wanted to do the Batman one, and then I wanted to follow it up with a Flash one, where it's Barry Allen is a Western sheriff, and he's the fastest gun alive, and he guns down Jay Garrick, the who's an older sheriff, and he sort of like takes over being sheriff of this town by gunning down Jay Garrick, taking his competition out, and then Wally West shows up to get revenge on Barry Allen, and that would have been a lot of fun. And of course, I probably would have wanted Eduardo Barreto on both of these projects I mentioned. It would have been dynamite, but I just kept getting pushed back. It's horrible. And the thing is, you can't. I mean, I've had so much success in comics. I mean, I'm a lucky guy. I've had like tremendous projects I've been involved on. Really, really satisfying. But you can't forget those ones you almost got to do. And I think every comic book creator, and I know everybody that works in movies has that. This project they really wanted to bring to life, and they just never got the chance. Jamal Sadler. My brother and I are currently in the works of starting a comic book company in Australia. We're working on a couple of books at the moment with me as the main writer and my brother as the main artist. What advice would you give to anyone looking at starting a business career in comics, and what roadmaps would they take to hopefully achieve success? Well, it's you and your brother working on it. So the artist thing doesn't come into question unless your brother can't meet a deadline. You have to love this. Seriously, you got to love comics to want to work at them. And you got to love comics if you think you're ever going to have a success at them. Because you're going to have a lot of disappointments, a lot of setbacks. It's not an easy road. And only your love of comics is going to get you through this. And, keep your eyes on the prize. Now, you're working for yourself, so you don't have to be aware of people taking advantage of your enthusiasm. You're working for yourself. You're going to pay yourself. So my only thing is, if you're starting a comic book company, you want to do a line of comics, I just warn you, do not grow too fast. Concentrate on your core titles. Maybe you've got one or two titles you've created, one or two characters or casts of characters, and just concentrate on making them the best you can. If you look at what Todd McFarlane did Spawn. It was all about Spawn. An even better example, Eric Larson. It was Savage Dragon. It was only Savage Dragon. He just did Savage Dragon. And he did some spin offs later when he established the character's credibility, established a fan base for the character, and then took off. Because, I mean, I got to imagine you don't have a whole lot of money to throw around. You don't have a whole lot of money to risk, a whole lot of money to lose. So you got to put in that sweat equity and make those first couple of comics the best you can make them before you ever think about hiring outside talent or expanding or anything else. Build up some capital. Capital is key in any business, but it's really key in comics. And it doesn't matter what part of comics business you're in. You retailers out there, you know what I'm saying. If you don't have capital, in other words, if you don't have money, actual cash to get you through the bad times or the slow times, you ain't going to make it. If you're relying on the sales of comic books every month, either as a publisher or a retailer, to get you by and pay the bills, you are sadly mistaken. You have to, bank some cash. And so I don't know if you go the crowdfunding route or the retail route or whatever you're doing, but just start slow and do the best you can. Don't run away with yourself. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody. Just like, oh well, what if we did this? What if we did that? Let's do this. Let's do that. Luckily at Rippaverse, my ideas are welcome, and they've been able to monetize them. Uh, I haven't had any flops that have cost them money, so we're good. But if you're doing this yourself, I mean, you're painfully aware there's only so much money, only so much time, and also you've got to put money into marketing now, and you've got to push this thing. And that's the hardest work of them all, is getting noticed in this crowded media environment that, it's just hard to get noticed. So got some work ahead of you. I really hope you love it, and I wish you all the best. But that's it, my friend. David Wolf, in an attempt to give the industry a massive shot in the arm as it pertains specifically to the publishing side of things, can you envision a time where DC and Marvel would agree to combine their universes? We'll assume a few things. Quality of writing and art is at least respectable. Characters from both publishers are treated with equal exposure and respect. This all happens in a new main publishing universe, shared though it may be, not in Elseworlds or other alternate reality. Respective previous continuities remain. This joint initiative is agreed to for a period of 10 years minimum, so there's some real commitment there. We'll assume all of the legalities have been thoroughly ironed out. Boy, okay, and your last question is, would it work? For how long? Or would it be a disaster? It would not work. It wouldn't be long. And yes, it would be a disaster. The nightmare scenario you've created here, back in the day when DC Comics was DC Comics and Marvel was Marvel, and that was it, this might have been doable. Now, DC belongs to Warner Brothers, Marvel belongs to Disney, and a merger, for them to allow a merger of these two universes, is unthinkable. And it doesn't matter what happens, what catastrophe faces the comic book industry, they are never going to allow these IPs to meet, because the mess that would be involved, talking about mess with the multiverses and all the rest of it. I mean, look at Marvel, where their universe is fragmented over a bunch of different film companies. The X-Men are here, Spider-Man's here, the rest of the gang are with Disney, and you can't. I mean, I can't even imagine the boardroom meetings over these things when they want to intermingle the different parts of the Marvel universe. Now imagine you've got these 80-year-old comic book franchises going to have to be mishmashed together in some sort of a weird merger. I mean, the contracts alone would probably break your back if you tried to carry one. I just can't imagine it ever happening. And it'd be cool. It'd probably be a good business move. Certainly would wake a lot of people up. Maybe do it as an ancillary thing, like, no, this isn't the main Marvel or DC universe. We're creating a new pocket universe where the two coexist, and we're all going to cooperate. But the biggest problem here, the biggest problem is um, there's no adults in the room anymore, either at DC or Marvel. There's no one there that could make this work. Now, back in the day, like I said, if you had someone like Paul Levitz or Jeanette Kahn over at DC, and you had somebody like Tom DeFalco or Jim Shooter over at Marvel, they could have made this work, and did make it work. And they had a number of epic and memorable crossovers, milestone kind of crossovers between the two companies. They used to be able to do this, and I don't see if they can do it anymore. And let's face it, the chances are more than even that whatever the current crowd of people managing these properties would, that whatever they produced would be not memorable, not good, basically unreadable nonsense and ugly. They would not put Dan Jurgens in charge of it, just to pick somebody who knows how to frickin' write a comic book and put a comic book property together. They're not going to put somebody of that level of talent on it. They're going to put their darlings on it, and we all know about their darlings and what they do. So it would end up just being, semi-pornographic fan fiction with no respect for the characters, DC and Marvel, because why would they respect them when they mix them when they don't respect them when they're being printed by their home publisher anymore? It's a sad state of affairs. I wish I could say yes. I mean, it's an awesome idea. It's an outrageous idea. It's kind of like a Donald Trump level hyperbolic crazy idea, like buying Greenland, but it just could never work. One more thing: if you've been watching these videos, and if what they're telling me as far as the reach on the internet is, you're probably already aware, there is a movie coming out based on my novel Levon's Trade, written by Sylvester Stallone, screenplay by Sylvester Stallone, starring Jason Statham, and it's called A Working Man. It comes out on March 28th. I would appreciate it if you would go see it with someone you love, and if Amazon would very much like it. Amazon is producing the movie. If you would go over to Amazon and buy some of the Levon Cade books, there's a bunch of them. There's 12. So, so it's just a shameless plug from me, but how often in my life am I going to get a major motion picture based on something that I wrote? I must say I'm pretty pleased about it. Why wouldn't I be? Anyway, if you need to contact me for any reason, questions, suggestions, crazy ideas like DC and Marvel joining forces, please contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. Bruno Bookstore@gmail.com for those of you listening in the car. And it's the best, most reliable way to get a hold of me. And as always, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, thanks for subscribing, and all the other things like the wonderful questions you're sending. I really thought you guys would run out of questions years ago, but you keep coming up with stuff for me to talk about. And I deeply, deeply appreciate it. You create the content for this show, and it's much appreciated. And I hope that I see all of you